make sure you got it before. Do you want me to make like a little? Did you get the presentation? Okay, is the mic on up here?
There's a PDF, because the PDF can be presented. Also, from the PDF version, it can be presented. I don't know if that works on the
Okay. Folks, we're having a little bit of a technical difficulty, and we should be able to get started here in just a few minutes. I apologize for the delay, but should not take long to get us going. I could do some dancing, but you probably don't want that. Thank you for your patience. Okay, great. Okay, well, we got the presentation, so they're gonna see if they can do it. I got the presentation. Karen, didn't we have this problem?
Yeah, no, it didn't work. Yeah, you're right. And last week I was in League of Women.
Not my friend at times. But welcome to First United Methodist Denton. My name is Reagan Gilliland. I'm one of the co-lead pastors here, and we are thrilled that you are here tonight. It's our third installation of a speaker series that our church Board of Society has put together. And so if you're on that committee or that's, are you committee? We're committee? Raise your hand and go, woo woo. Okay. So they do incredible work, and I'm so thrilled to have them as part of our church. Yes. And if you would like to know more about the work that they are doing, I'm sure any of them would love to talk to you after tonight's presentation. We are thrilled to have another great, inspiring, and informational series tonight, and so I'm going to let our guest speaker take it away. So come on up and tell us a little about yourself.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, hi everyone, I'm Lauren Santoro. I'm an assistant professor of political science at UT Dallas. The emphasis on assistant, I don't have tenure yet, so assistant professor, and also I'm not here in any official capacity, so don't ring my employer or anything. But I do study misinformation and specifically how information diffuses among individuals, and I teach a class at UT Dallas on fake news. So I'm talking today about fake or fact. Can you tell the difference? And do you want to? Okay, so we're going to talk about strategies about how to detect misinformation, but we're also going to talk about our motivations. Are we motivated to, not believe something even when it makes us feel good, and even when it makes our side look good? So let me tell you where we're going today. Next slide. Okay. I'm going to talk to you about what is misinformation. Do I need to turn this down? I feel like it's a little... Okay, I'm getting an echo. But let's talk about what is misinformation, how and why do we believe misinformation, so the psychology, and the cognition behind why we believe information that's not true. We're going to talk about how we spot it, what we can do about it, and even if we should do anything about it. And then finally, we're going to talk about the 2024 elections. And so, I should also mention that today is the last day to register to vote. If you have not registered, your time is quickly running out. So next slide. Let's talk about what is misinformation, and you can keep going. I don't know if you can see the text on the screen, but I will be circulating, and Deb will be circulating the slides. So you will have all of this information. But we need to talk about what is misinformation, because how we define it definitely affects how we spot it and what we can do about it. So there's a lot of different definitions. I'm proposing one. Okay? Misinformation is false or misleading information that is spread regardless of intent. Okay, so false, misleading information, we need to verify information as false. And in a minute, we're going to do some exercises on that. So you need to be able to verify the piece of information as false or true. Okay, so then this means that it doesn't include people's opinion. Opinion should be based on facts, but you can't falsify an opinion, It's an opinion, okay? And it also doesn't include things we don't like. Just because we don't like this information, doesn't mean necessarily that it's misinformation. And I'm saying that intent doesn't matter, because false information can mislead, can change behavior, can have effects, regardless of whether it was spread with malintent or not. Okay, so false information that is spread regardless of intent, and I'm going to argue that it's harmful. I think that that's something we agree on, And then next slide. So verifiably false. How do we verify something as false? And you can move forward. So this is a meme, and I apologize, you probably can't see it, but it's from Mark Hamill, aka Luke Skywalker, and he's saying, with fear for our democracy, I dissent. And you see it's a meme of President Trump, raising a hand, and it's talking about Project 2025, okay, which is the Heritage Foundation, a policy, right, really, really long brief on kind of what the new Trump administration, a new presidential administration should do. And if we were trying to understand if this meme was true or false, how would we verify the veracity, the truth of claims in this meme? What would you do? Read it, okay? So this is easy, right? I mean, it takes time, but we could go and read Project 2025, and we could verify if these statements on the meme are true. And you can't read all of the statements, and I can barely read all the statements from here, but some of the statements and a lot of the statements on this meme are true, but there's a lot that are also false, okay? So this meme says that Project 2025 says that they want to and calls for cutting Social Security. And this is something that Vice President Harris, right, also mentioned, has talked about, but it's false. Project 2025 does not, right, mention Social Security and doesn't talk about cutting Social Security. So that's an example. There are things on this meme that are true, there are some that are false, and there are some that are false that even originated on The Onion, right, or right, satire sites that, right, were incorporated into this meme. So again, we can verify, we can go to the source of what is actually in Project 2025, but this particular meme contains false information. There's true information, but there's false information as well, and then you can move forward. Here are two other examples, and I don't think that you can see them, which is a bummer, but on your right is an envelope, and on the envelope there's an R. So this is from Minnesota and the election administration in Minnesota, and this person on Instagram is saying, did you know that in Minnesota they mark your party affiliation in the outside of the envelope for your mail-in ballot? Why would they do that? To tip off corrupt men and women delivering or receiving that mail to discard Republican ballots. And this is about Tim Walz being from Minnesota. So how would we verify this information about the R's and mail-in ballots in Minnesota? What would we do? Yeah, Secretary of State, the Elections Division in Minnesota. You could figure this out. And it turns out this is incorrect, okay? So in Minnesota in mail-in ballots, there is an R on the mail-in ballot, but that R indicates if they are registered to vote or not. And this is important in a state in Minnesota because Minnesota, unlike Texas, allows for same-day voter registration. So when mail-in ballots are sent, you need to know, who's registered, who's not, because anyone can register on up until election day. The other, I think it's an Instagram post on the right, saying Governor Tim Walz had his police use paintball guns to shoot Minnesota residents if they broke curfew by being on their porches during COVID. And it's a link to a video of police in Minnesota shooting paintball guns at residents. How would we verify if this is false or not? Harder, right? Yeah, original video, maybe we could get a journalist to investigate, figure out the source of this, okay? So this is a little harder to do, but you could figure out, we could, turn to our journalists, the professionals, and see. What else was going on in Minnesota in May of 2020? George Floyd. Okay, so this is a real video of the National Guard using paintball guns on residents, breaking curfew for the George Floyd protest. Okay, so same, it's a real video, the same context in Minnesota. What's happening is true, but it's not to enforce COVID-19, curfew for COVID-19, to enforce a curfew for George Floyd protest. So those are some examples, again, of how we verify something is false, and you can move forward. Okay, we talked about what is misinformation, verifiably false information that is spread regardless of intent. Now we're going to talk about the science behind why we believe misinformation. So you can move forward again. So first of all, why we believe false information is that we assume speakers are truthful. Not just people you talk to, but you assume, your mind automatically and unconsciously assumes that the information that you read is true. Okay, so to override this assumption, right, we need to engage in this slow cognition, right, kind of override this automatic system. We expect speakers to be truthful, however, individuals take liberties with the truth. So in conversations you've had with your friends, maybe this is just me, when you're recounting stories, sometimes you embellish a certain fact, overemphasize something. You don't tell them the whole story to make you look better. But speakers, individuals take liberties with the truth, and people self-report lying in conversation in surprising rates. Okay, so this happens all the time. And some individuals and organizations have incentives to lie. This makes sense. And even, politicians, research suggests and shows that being vague is a winning strategy. You want to hedge, you want to be vague, because if you state a position on something, if you come out and say it, well then you're going to piss a lot of people off. You might make some people happy, but you're going to piss a lot of people off, okay? So individuals lie, there are incentives and rewards to lie, and politicians do this, again, because it's a winning strategy. So you can move forward, please. Also, when we try to by itself rely on quote-unquote credible sources, and we'll talk about what those are as we move forward, but this is not a very powerful strategy in the long run because we forget the source of information at a lot faster rates than than the information itself or what you feel about a piece of information. So for example, where did you learn that DC was the capital of the United States? School, right? Maybe, but what grade, right? Is it a teacher? Was this a parent? Okay, this is kind of a silly example just to illustrate the concept that we can remember information and we often forget where it came from. So that means that even if we are reading information that we, at the time, recognize as coming from a suspicious source or a biased source, over time, we forget the source information and remember the information or just the valence of that information, just the positive or negative emotion that we get from that information over time. So next slide, please. We're also going to do a few exercises of which statement are you more likely to believe is true, so you can move forward. Okay, so which statement, top or bottom, are you more likely to believe is true? Neither one of them is true, you're right. So it's a little hard to tell, but the bottom statement is bolded. Okay, so bolded statements, we're more likely to remember information that is bolded. So this is why in my syllabi, I bold information that I want to make sure the students see, but we remember, more likely to remember bolded information, and you can move forward. Okay, leaflets 3, let it be, berries white, a poisonous sight, or white berries are poisonous. The rhyming statement. Okay, so we're more likely to believe rhyming statements, okay? Flows off the tongue, it's catchy, you remember it. Okay, you can move forward. The stormy seas tossed the boat, or he saved up his money and bought a boat. Who says stormy seas? Okay, who says he saved up his money and bought a boat? Okay, really hard to tell. It's actually the stormy seas tossed the boat. And that's because it's just easier to understand. When you read the stormy seas, you're primed to think boat. Just makes sense. Whereas if you heard the statement, he saved up his money, it doesn't logically follow that he would buy a boat. Okay, so information that is easier to understand, or is primed. Again, the stormy seas is priming the idea of the boat. That is easier to understand. Next slide, please. Okay, the Roma is the largest river in Italy, or butterflies are in the same evolutionary family as centipedes. Which statement? The butterfly. Okay, so when a statement is accompanied by a relevant photograph, you're more likely to believe it. Okay, so it can't just be a photo that doesn't, an image that doesn't apply, but when something is, again, accompanied by a relevant photo or image, you're more likely to believe it. And I should state that both of those statements, these are false statements, okay? So butterfly is not in the same evolutionary family as centipedes, and I think the Po is the largest river in Italy, so I don't want to spread misinformation. But these are both incorrect. Next slide, please. Okay, and so these examples illustrate these ease of processing and ease of understanding heuristic. What is heuristic? It's a cognitive shortcut. It's a decision-making strategy. It's something that you use to help aid and make your decision more efficient. So for example, when you vote in November, candidates, after their name, will be their party affiliation. Okay, so that Republican label or the Democrat label is a heuristic, right? It's something that your mind uses, okay, I can rely on this label and not have to, can just vote the party ticket and not have to, think too hard about it. But the things that the examples that I talked about, those are the things that are easier to process, easier for our mind to process and understand, are associated with being truthful. Oh, well, that makes sense, so it must be true, okay? You're more likely to believe a clear native speaker, high contrast bolded statements, rhyming statements, information accompanied by a relevant photograph. So that's just, summing up what we just figured out for ourselves. And just because, we hear something a lot, doesn't mean it's necessarily true. So next slide, please. What we also know, and maybe this is hard to hear for some in this room, it's certainly hard for myself to incorporate and understand, is that we are susceptible to fake news or false information even when we know better, even when we have the information that would tell us otherwise. And it's those of us that are more politically sophisticated, who know more about politics, and I'm talking about myself, that are more prone to, maybe bias and information processing, but we're also more likely to utilize heuristics or decision-making strategies that sometimes can lead us astray. And the more we know about politics or insert field, the better able we are to counter-argue or contradict information that contradicts what we believe about the world. Okay, so the more you know, the more that I am able to recognize, okay, this piece of information, does not support what I already believe, and I have more tools with which to counter-argue or contradict that information. Next slide, please. This is related to what we're going to get back to at the end of our discussion on motivations. The reality is that we are motivated to confirm the truth that we want to exist. And as I said, this is especially true for those who know more about politics, but it's especially true for those of us who feel strongly tied to a political party. The strong Republicans, the strong Democrats. The more important that identity to you, the more this motivated reasoning comes into play, okay? So what are motivations? They're the wishes and desires that we associate with a task. And motivations, whether we're motivated to make an accurate decision, whether we're motivated to make a decision that preserves our beliefs, kind of this directional motivated reasoning, it it influences how we search for information, if we notice peripheral information, how we evaluate information, and how we utilize that information in our decision making. Okay, so if we are motivated to come to a preset conclusion, to, again, make decisions that are in line with what we already believe about the world, that is going to shape what information that we read and what we do with that information if we incorporate that information in the first place. Next slide, please. So this is all related to what I've been talking about as motivated reasoning, right? All reasoning is motivated. There's a goal behind, right, all reasoning, and it's just determining what are those motivations. So this leads to what I was talking about confirmation bias and the opposite of disconfirmation bias. So confirmation bias is that you look for and remember information that is consistent to your pre-established beliefs, and then disconfirmation bias is when you use inconsistent information and you apply more scrutiny to that, or you counter-argue that information. This all leads to selective exposure, and selective exposure is just the idea that your previously established beliefs influence what information you search for and which sources that you turn to for news. I'm going to look at and read news that is that portrays my side well in a good light, for example. Next slide, please. Okay, this has been a lot, and so I'm going to try to summarize why we believe things are false. So first of all, we're motivated to achieve these directional goals, to make decisions that are consistent with what we already believe, especially for those of us that are the strongest partisans, those that are more strongly stronger Democrats and stronger Republicans, and those of us who know more about politics. What's also I should end this section with is that, and I mentioned it previously, we instinctively accept information is true. Okay, and so to override this automatic process, again, we need to stop and engage in slow cognition and kind of pause this automatic system in order to tag something as false. So it's difficult to do because it's not natural to do. It doesn't happen automatically. You have to engage in another step, for example. Next slide, please. Okay, how can we spot misinformation, this false information that is spread regardless of intent? How can we spot it? You're not going to be able to read it. I've given you a laundry list of things that you can do, and then I'm going to talk about a few of them. So I will read this list. First, pay attention to the domain and the URL. Okay, so sometimes the domain will be a little bit off the URL. Maybe it's usatoday.com.com, That's an indication of something being amiss. The headline. News organizations, sites make money on clicks and advertising. Okay, so the headlines that make you want to click, or panic, because it's Republicans are doing this, or Democrats are, throwing democracy out the door. I don't know. But those headlines that make you want to click, be wary of those, because they often contain a lot of misinformation. Using the About Us section to check the source if you're not familiar with the source. You want to check out the author. What are their credentials? Are they just someone that goes by a pen name that you can't find out any information about? That would be an indication that you need to maybe be more cautious when approaching the article. Evaluating the evidence, and I'm going to give us some steps to do that. Even just looking at the quotes and who said them. So in articles that are that do contain misinformation or just clickbait, a surprising amount of them quote people. And if you Google the quotes, you can find out that either they didn't say that or they said it in a different context that maybe makes more sense. So you want to check out and be suspicious of quotes. Check the comments. Not that you would want to look at the comment section of some of these websites, but you can. And it's right indication you can tell, are these real people engaging in the comment sections? Are they, commenting substantively, or is it just a mess? You can do that. Reverse image search, which you can do with Google. Inspect the dates. So sometimes the dates are an indication that, again, something's wrong, and information can be taken out of context that is important to recognize. It's also important to understand if the article is satire or not, or if it's opinion. So there's a lot of, I think, really good political satire out there, but taken out of context, right, we believe it's easy to see that, especially in today's political environment, that we might believe it as well. Check your biases and consult fact-checking organizations. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fact-checking and give you kind of some steps and some resources I think are on your handout. But what is fact-checking? It's essentially, they're essentially isolating a claim and they're verifying the validity of that claim. And these claims are typically made by public officials and politicians. And the goal is to identify whether or not the claim is true. Next slide, please. And this is, I've given you some sources of where to go for this, but it's easy to incorporate this in our daily reading of news. And that's via reading like a fact checker, doing what I kind of shows you at the beginning, isolating one claim that you can go and you can verify. Use primary sources if possible, okay? If someone's talking about the Constitution, says that X, Y, and Z, well, you can look at the Constitution, You can verify that. So isolate the claim, seek the best primary source, and do the sources match or refute the claim being made? And then think critically about what are the limitations of the data, of the evidence being presented, and that's how to read like a fact checker. Next slide, please. And again, these are just the organizations that are included on your handout. Next slide. And more organizations, and then next slide. What I will say about fact-checking and does it work? In theory, it's a good thing, and I definitely think it is a good thing. But the effectiveness of fact-checking is pretty limited, unfortunately. It's a good tool, but the effectiveness is limited. It's more likely to work when the individual thinks that the fact-checker is on their side. Okay? If the New York Times fact checks, if they say that something is false, a Republican might not believe it, and there are other ways, and it goes both ways, okay? So fact-checking messages are more effective when individuals think and feel that the fact-checker is on their side, okay? And that's intuitive, that makes sense. And more sophisticated individuals, and by that I mean those of us that just know more about politics, you're actually less likely to have your beliefs changed by fact-checking. It doesn't work, okay, as well. It doesn't work as well. And there's no difference between individuals who identify as Democrats or Republicans on this, except that Republicans are more likely to accept fact-checking from pro-attitudinal sources, for sources that they feel that are, quote-unquote, on their side. Okay, so fact-checking is a good, cool tool, but it doesn't always work. So what else would work? Next slide, please. And you can't see this, but I think that the source is on your handout. This is the All Sides Media Bias Chart, allsides.com. And this is just a chart of bias, okay? And specifically political bias. So on one end, the dark L is, right, liberal bias. The lighter blue L is like lean left, right, lean liberal. There's a center lean right and a right bias. So I should preface the fact that bias, bias, I don't think that it is possible to be unbiased, but it is possible to be aware of the biases of the sources that we read, okay? And, I should also state that they're classifying news organizations into, bias, but they're not looking at accuracy. Okay, so this is just bias. This is not looking at whether or not the information is accurate or if journalistic standards are upheld, etc. But this is a good resource. On their website, they also have a tool where you can search and you can look at how different sources from across the political spectrum are talking about a political event. Okay, so you can just go to their page and you can see how these sources on the right, how are they talking about Milton, Hurricane Milton? How are sources in the center, how are sources on the left talking about it? Okay, and it's very eye-opening in that regard. So this is a good source, but it's just bias. It doesn't look at accuracy. Next slide, please. This slide's going to be even more difficult to see. And I apologize. This is from Ad Fontes Media. So, and I think this is also on your sheet. It's ADFONTES media.com. And their media bias chart has both bias and accuracy. So on the y-axis, this bottom axis, sources towards the left lean left, and sources on the right lean right. The higher that you go on the y-axis is more accurate. So the higher you go is there are more accuracy in these sources. So ideally, you would want to read sources maybe in this upper quadrant of organizations. And if you go to their website, this is interactive, you can look for your favorite source and you can understand not just their bias, but also, are they actually doing good reporting? Are they following, standard journalistic standards and guidelines, for example? So we want to be in this upper quadrant of this figure, and you can't see where, and I can barely see kind of these different news sources, but at the very top is what is called USA Facts, and this is on the sheet. So usafacts.org they just present the facts from the government behind certain statistics. So you'll hear politicians say, 48% of Americans are, living without health care. You can look at those facts at USA Facts. I think it's .com, whatever, it's on your thing. Okay, thank you, .org, thank you. So that is up there. But you can see, sources there's an NPR, BBC, PBS NewsHour, some Ballotpedia. Stars and Stripes is a good resource for military news. If you're interested in unbiased news about the U.S. military, it's stripes.com. So in your, tonight or tomorrow, whenever you think about it, you should go to this website and look at your Again, which sources do you get your news from? It also has, it's not just traditional news media, but it also includes podcasts, if you listen to podcasts, or radio shows, or YouTube channels, so they have a lot of information. And again, we want to be reading things from maybe sources on all sides, right, that lean left and lean right. But what's important is that we're reading information from those sources that are quality sources on both sides. And this chart will help you. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're here and we're talking about what should we do about misinformation. So, right, I've talked about it, what it is, why we believe it, how we can spot it, but what can we do about it? I think that we should try to correct misinformation, that we should try to do something about it. But you might disagree with me. I'm going to, though, argue that this is something that we should try to do something about. And specifically, I'm going to talk about individual level solutions. Of course, I think there are institutional level and government level solutions that can be really helpful. That businesses, and news organizations can also, there's things that they need to and should do. But I'm going to talk about what can we as individuals do. So why should we do anything about it is because once information and misinformation is out there, it is very hard to correct. So, once it's out there, once it's published on even one site, it is very, very difficult to correct. I'm not going to say impossible, but it's really difficult to correct. So once we receive it, again, it's very difficult to correct, and it's not possible to completely eliminate the influence of misinformation on individuals, even after it's corrected. So even after we realize or understand something is false, it can continue to influence our beliefs and our behavior. And sometimes when misinformation is debunked, and I'm going to give an example of debunking, sometimes debunking can actually strengthen our belief in the misinformation. So sometimes we can do more damage when we debunk, because people hold under threat, people will hold more strongly to what they already believe about the world. And that's called, those are backfire effects. There are some strategies, though, that work to some extent, and I'm going to talk about those strategies. Next slide. So the first strategy is attitudinal inoculation or preemption. So this works exactly like a flu shot. If you get a flu shot, you're giving your body antibodies, to fight off future flu infection. Okay, so you're inoculating yourself against the flu to hopefully, reduce the symptoms of if you do get flu down the line. And so that is the same idea when we're talking about attitudinal inoculation. You can be inoculated against misinformation by exposing people to some information, refuted information, before they hear them. Okay, so you can give people a warning, this inoculation. Warn people that misinformation is coming and arm them with a counter-argument. Okay, so this can happen generally. Media sometimes gets breaking news incorrect. Okay. Breaking news, it's very hard, and the aftermath of, an event, breaking news, there's just not enough information. Organizations are trying to present information as fast as they can, but it's not always, it might be, incorrect. Okay, so you can give general warnings. And you can also inoculate individuals against the source of information, if there's a particular source, by drawing attention to who is behind the messages and what their incentives are. Okay, so there's general examples of this Again, media can sometimes do X, Y, and Z, right? You can be a little bit more specific about, as we get closer to the November elections, right, there will be more misinformation spread around the safety and validity of the ballot box, okay? Giving people a warning and providing a counter-argument. And next slide, please. You can also, if you can't preempt, you can debunk, okay? So this is debunking, and there are 5 steps. The first step is fact. Lead with the fact if it's clear. Make it simple, concrete, plausible. It must fit with the story. Then you warn about the myth. Warn that the misinformation is coming. State the myth very fast. Explain how that myth misleads. And then end with the fact, the true information. Okay, so 4 steps. And on the next slide, I'm going to give you an example. Next slide, please. Okay, you can't read this, and my apologies. So here's an example. And I'm following the 4 steps. The first step is fact. Voter fraud in the United States is uncommon. When it does occur, it doesn't occur in numbers big enough to change the outcome of an election. Warn about the myth. Some Democratic and Republican candidates mistakenly claimed that voter fraud occurred in the 2022 midterm elections. Here's where I'm explaining the fallacy. A 2014 study found 31 credible instances of voter fraud out of 1 billion votes cast from 2000 to 2014. In addition, the conservative-leaning Heritage Foundation found 5 cases of fraud throughout the state of Texas in 2022. Since no elections were lost by 5 votes, none of these elections were lost by 5 votes, the small amount of fraud that did happen would not have changed the outcome of the election. Fact, voter fraud is uncommon and has not changed the outcome of an election in the United States. Okay, so that's an example, again, of how to debunk. Again, won't always work, but how to debunk if you cannot, right, preempt or inoculate someone. Next slide, please. How can we, right, limit the consumption and sharing of fake news or misinformation? First of all, take a critical eye toward information as you come across it. Okay, always be skeptical. You should be skeptical. Never believe what you read or see or hear, on TV or read in the newspaper. Just be skeptical. Adopt a buyer beware stance toward all information on social media. Buyer beware. Slow down and consider the provided information, right? And via reading like a fact checker. Next slide, please. Finally, right, consider the bias, track record, and expertise of the source. What are their motives? Become more discerning in your sharing behavior, right? We want to be, right, what we share with friends and family, either publicly or via, right, a group message. Just be more discerning. And consider our own motivations when we are deciding what to share. Why are we sharing the information in the first place? Do we want to prove someone wrong? I'm right, you're wrong, right? Do we want to make our side or ourselves feel better, okay? If those are our motivations, perhaps you shouldn't, right, share. Next slide, please. Talking toward or moving toward the 2024 elections, I just want to give a warning. So I'm trying to inoculate you. Next slide. And you can't read the information on this slide, but it's talking about efforts, not just from Russia, but Russia, China, Iran, Cuba, insert country here, to get involved and muddy the waters of our election, okay? So Russia's in the game, we knew that from 2016. But it's not just Russia anymore. Again, it's Iran, it's China, Cuba, et cetera, Pakistan, et cetera. And it's not just our enemies, quote unquote, Americans, right, enemies, it's our allies as well, okay? So the Brits are in the game, and we're doing it too, okay? So US is not, I guess US is always engaged in propaganda, but we're involved too. What to say, though, is that as we get closer to the election, as we get closer to Election Day in November, this is going to pick up. And these are coordinated efforts using fake accounts, using influencers and politicians and personalities in the US, so US citizens, that are unknowingly sometimes working for these entities. And Russia is trying some tactics, and they're spreading pro-Trump, anti-Harris messages. Iran is spreading pro-Harris, anti-Trump messages. China's kind of all over the place. Iran specifically is trying to incite violence and political action. Again, I'm not sharing this I don't want to scare anyone, but just to, again, warn us that this is happening and in numbers that we really haven't seen, ever, okay? This is happening, and the point, even though they're different countries, and even though there's different messages, but the point is to sow discord, the point is to divide us and get us pissed off at each other. That's the goal, okay? Discord, discontent, that's the goal. So, buyer beware, this is happening. Next slide, please. Okay, I don't want to end on a, particularly negative note. So let's talk about the fan and the good citizen, okay? So if you think of the fan, I always think of my husband. He's a Dallas Cowboys fan, When they lose, which they have been losing a lot for many, many years, The team's losses are his losses. Their wins are his wins. The Cowboys, the embarrassments are his embarrassments. Okay, that's a fan, You are supporting your team regardless of, the score, regardless of, who's leading the organization, et cetera, okay? Apply that to politics. Okay, so fans in politics are motivated to maintain their allegiance to a political party, be that Republicans or Democrats. The party's losses are their losses, their wins are their wins, their embarrassments are their embarrassments. So, their identities are wrapped into, the being a member of the political party. Okay, so that's the fan. When we talk about the good citizen, okay, so good citizens are motivated by objectivity and pragmatism. They want to hold parties accountable, to doing what they said they will do, okay? So that's the good citizen, okay? And these motivations or caricatures are often and sometimes can be in conflict with each other. We want to be a good team player, Rah, rah, we want to be a good fan. But what if parties are doing something that we don't like, we don't agree with, How do we reconcile those things? And that tension, that cognitive dissonance, is uncomfortable. We hate that tension, How do we, maintain party allegiances and hold, parties accountable? And sometimes those competing motivations, again, of being a good team player or of being a good citizen, really do conflict and really are in conflict with one another. And that's really, really uncomfortable. So I want to leave us then with some questions. Okay, what are you motivated to defend? I think it's good to understand this. What team are you on? Democrats, Republicans? Are you willing to reject, false information, misinformation that makes your team look good or makes the other side look bad? Are you actually seeking, truth? Or are you reinforcing and defending your partisan views? If we can't get it right in this room, right? If we can't, in this room, do that, again, set aside, right, kind of our team hats and, right, and hold parties accountable and our leaders accountable, then who can? If we can't do it, right, who can? I think, right, that's bodes very poorly for democracy, okay? If we just can't set aside our fan hats. So I'm not, right, asking everyone in this room to agree, right? We need disagreement. We need people that think differently than us. That's, right, where, right, this country has always been, right, the strongest. But we need to redefine what being a good fan looks like. Being a good Republican, being a good Democrat should also mean holding leaders and parties accountable. Should also mean, right, putting country above party, which may be eye roll, right? But we should and could, right, let's redefine what is a fan to include being objective, to include holding parties accountable and leaders accountable for what they say and what they do, and electing politicians who will do the same. So I'm asking us then to remove our Republican and Democrats' hats, to find areas of agreement where we can, and having better and more productive disagreements. We absolutely need to do that. And I want us to appreciate that people of intelligence and goodwill can continue to differ deeply, and that we are not enemies, but merely rivals in our interpretation of the common weal. So as we move forward to the final days, thank goodness, of, right, the election season, let us remember that, right? We are not enemies, just rivals in our interpretation of what, right, what the problems are, what the solutions are, and again, just removing our party hats to consider accuracy, objectivity, and pragmatism. So thank you. Thank you. My email address, you also cannot see it, but my email address is up there and it's in the slides, but you cannot see. Are you gonna facilitate?
Hello. Hello. I'm a little nervous for Q&A, if you know why. Our last event. Anyway, we have time for just probably 2 questions or so. And I wanted to see if anyone had any questions.
There's one on there.
Oh, okay. Okay, I have one here and then one back there. Okay. I know you guys, so this works out well. Okay.
Do parliamentary systems change the dynamic much?
Okay, so the question is, do parliamentary systems change the dynamic much? So yes. So there are certain things, of course, misinformation is a problem everywhere, but there are certain things about the United States that really make it this microcosm of, right, misinformation. So, right, the first is our free speech protections. So the First Amendment protections that exist in this country are truly exceptional. They don't exist anywhere else in the world, right, even, right, England or free speech protections. That means that you can, right, say anything. And the government, now Facebook can kick you off, but the government can't do anything about it. So that is one. The other is what you mentioned, right? We have a 2-party system. This is Duverger's law. That's a law in political science. But in a first past the post winner take all system, only 2 parties can exist, and that can lead, when the lines, as they are right now in American politics between Democrats and Republicans, are so clearly drawn, right, and we're so polarized, that along with, again, these free speech protections that exist, really do make the United States particularly susceptible to misinformation.
Hello, hello. Can you talk for a minute about the impact of artificial intelligence on some of this information? Because I'm aware of one in which a candidate supposedly said some things, and it looked very realistic because of artificial intelligence, and the candidate did actually not say those things.
Yes, so artificial intelligence and like deep fake videos, so videos where, right, maybe Obama or former President Trump is, right, saying something in video form. Both are very big problems, and the technology has just gotten so much better. Like every month, every right day, the technology is getting better and better, and this is being employed by, right, the foreign, nations that are trying to disrupt and sow discord. So, right, China is using AI and deep fakes, Iran, Russia, etc. But this is happening, and it's really that, like, yeah, even video or a voice where you could maybe trust it in the past, I would, right, be very skeptical of anything that's not, right, verified by a source, a reputable source. But it's absolutely a problem.
Do you distinguish between misinformation and disinformation? My understanding is that disinformation is when intent is to misinform others.
Yes, so that is a good distinction. So misinformation is the definition I gave you, right? False information spread regardless of intent. And disinformation, right, is the malintent, where the false information is spread intentionally to deceive. Those distinctions are important, but my argument is that they both, right, mislead, and they're both, harmful. And so right, whether or not something is, right, disinformation, intentionally spread, or, right, to deceive, or whether something is spread, right, without that intention, it's still harmful. And again, once misinformation is out there, it is really difficult to correct. And so there is a distinction. It is my belief that the intent doesn't matter, right? Whether false information is spread intentionally or not doesn't matter. It's still harmful. But reasonable people, right, there are different debates in the literature on that.
Okay.
There's one more.
Thanks. Oh, there's one. Sorry, bright lights. Okay.
This is easy. Are you in the political science department or the psychology department?
Thanks for the softball. I actually paid her to answer that question. I'm in political science, so but I do teach a course on political psychology, and so it's psychology behind voting and political behavior. And so my research very much is the intersection of political science and psychology. Yeah, thank you. Did you have one?
I thought there was more. One more here? Where? Okay. Oh.
I was wondering if you could say something about the people who refuse to participate and what the thinking is, and can we reach them?
So individuals that don't want to vote, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so there's a large literature on non-voting, and non-voting is seen sometimes as a form of political participation. So sometimes it can be you don't have the resources to vote, so you can't get off work to vote. You can't, right, you just don't have the time or the resources to get to the polls. Sometimes it can be you're, right, maybe like there's some apathy. But sometimes it can be very intentional, a form of political protest, right? A form of voicing that neither the Republican candidate or the Democratic candidate, right, represents me, and so I'm not gonna, right, vote. And that's seen, it's a form of political protest. Now, there are reasons for it. I don't agree personally that you shouldn't, right, not vote, right? I think that that's very important to vote and to do your duty. But there are different reasons for non-voting, it's not just apathy all the time, or it's not just lack of resources. In some cases, it can be a form of protest, or kind of your, sticking it to the man, I guess. Yeah.
This may be a little off-center, but I appreciate that last question someone asked. It seems to me we're all susceptible to these things if we just look any commercial on TV, whether it's for a drug, an automobile, or a food, whatever it is. And the other point is, it's a little more related to political science, I guess. If anybody's ever been in a courtroom and listening to two sides, and if you're in the jury box, somebody's trying to influence you with information or misinformation, and witnesses can see the same thing and give different accounts of it. After the jury has heard it all, they go into a room and they try to decide what's real and what's true. And I suppose for that reason, so many people, when they get the jury call and they have to go down to the courthouse, they just hope they don't get selected. And I suppose sometimes we end up with hung juries because people either have their bias when they walk into the jury room, or they didn't want to be there in the first place, or they're so convinced of their particular interpretation of what they saw, they can't come to a conclusion. And I was just curious if you had any thoughts about that, because that's bringing it down to a very personal level.
Yeah.
Not get selected for the jury.
I hope
and sometimes during voir dire, they will tell things that exaggerate things, hoping that one of the attorneys will not pick them.
Yeah, so I'll want to start with one of your first points about, this happens all the time. The commercials that we see on TV, they're trying to get us to buy something or do something. You're absolutely right? They're trying to manipulate us in one form or another. And politics, along with other industries, and specifically also, sometimes in news, want to grip your emotions, because they know that if they get an emotional reaction out of you, they can get you to do something. And the literature on emotions is really fascinating. So if a politician can make you angry, they can make you angry. Anger is an emotion that drives people to action, to violence. It's going to shut down you searching for any information, so it's going to shut down an information search and drive you to action. So if politicians want to get you to vote, in November, they're going to make you angry, or protests are going to make you angry. If they make you anxious or afraid, when you feel anxious or afraid, you are willing to search for more information. You are willing to actually learn about what is making you anxious and afraid, but you're going to gravitate toward information that confirms what you already believe via this selective exposure. So this emotional thing is happening, again, not just in politics or political news, but happens in multiple industries. Your comments about juries and the deliberation process, so there's a lot of work, not necessarily in political science, but close to it, but looking at jury deliberation and the bias that occurs not just among juries, but in eyewitness testimony can be biased and flawed, and just the way that our brain works and these evolutionary processes that our brain has developed to account for the millions of pieces of information that our eyes are sending to our brain at one point in time can lead to error and biased decision making. And so there is work that applies that to jury deliberations, and juries are just as susceptible, and counsels and prosecutors are wanting to try to pull on the heartstrings and convince them using tactics that they know will be effective.
Okay, we've got, I think, one last question.
Thank you very much. Now that I know that you are a political science psychologist,
I'm not a therapist, though, so.
I wonder if political scientists are studying if there's any growth in a segment of the population who basically believes that there's no such thing as fact, there's no such thing as truth, that things are really better if the populace doesn't even care about facts or truth because there is no such thing.
So, okay, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're trying to know about what do we know about people who don't believe in, right, truth or separating fact from fiction? Is that the question? Please clarify if not. But there is, right, and we very much are in kind of this, what is called a post-truth culture, right, where it just happens that there are fewer and fewer facts that people on the left and the right, agree on. And so there is work in political science, right, documenting that and studying that, but that is what's, right, we call it like the post-truth culture. And again, that's just, there is a shrinking number of facts that are, again, not seen as, right, partisan or biased, but that is definitely happening right now, for sure.
Okay. Deb, do you want to come up too? Yeah, Deb, come on up. Okay. So one thing I love about being a United Methodist is that we are told to not leave our brains at the door, and I'm so thankful for things like this that challenge us to think critically, and we're not always right, and so like trying to figure that out, I think is such a good tool, and we should do it more, especially as Christians, trying to figure out, and so we can be truthful and honor and be loving. So I want to thank Deb for leading kind of the charge on this with her great team. Did you want to say anything else about voting or what you do?
Just that one quick thing, we have some people from League of Women Voters who have information on a table downstairs. Please stop and pick up some really good information that they've brought plenty for you guys to share. And I do want to say one thing. Lauren has been very gracious. I will be, for everybody who has registered, I will be sending her presentation out to you guys, her PowerPoint slides or a PDF. I'll be sending.
And the slides, there's a resources, so it's like an appendix that contains more information as well, but like resources that you can use.
Great. So thank you so much, Lauren, for being here with us.
All right. Well, thank you for being with us tonight. If you're looking for a place to worship, if you're a guest, we'd love to have you on a Sunday. Have a safe and good evening, and we'll see you soon.
If anybody has any questions about church and society, also,